Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we unfortunately have to talk about Facebook because Facebook is about to get even worse with disinformation starting very soon. Here's what's going on. This is coming from Axios, and I think this is deeply concerning, especially given the state of the world and politics here in the United States. But more on that in a second. This is what's going on. Meta, aka Facebook, this past Tuesday began telling its news partners, those would be news sources in the United States, that Facebook will no longer have plans to pay publishers for their content that they run on the Facebook News tab. Now, here's why this matters. As basically Facebook moves forward with basically huge, massive changes to the Facebook experience, news has become less of a priority. That, I think, is deeply concerning. Now, Meta's VP of Partnerships, Campbell Brown, told staffers at Facebook that the company was shifting resources away from its news products to support even more creative initiatives, according to the Wall Street Journal. What those creative initiatives are, I have to imagine, would be the metaverse, as Mark Zuckerberg himself seems to be singularly focused on that, not to mention changing Facebook and Instagram to be more TikTok friendly, since TikTok is kicking their butt. And if you think I'm a fan of TikTok, go watch yesterday's video. Delete TikTok now. Now, on top of this, if you didn't know, Facebook brokered a slew of 3-year deals with publishers back in 2019, 3 years ago, so those are coming up for renewal. At that time, Facebook was ramping up its investment in news and actually hired journalists to help direct publisher traffic to its, basically, for its tab for news. You could hit the tab news in Facebook and actually get news. Now, these deals overall were worth roughly $105 million, according to Axios, just here in the United States. In addition to that, Facebook spent around $90 million on news videos, which basically had its own tab called Watch. Now, a Facebook spokesperson talking to Axios said, and I quote, "A lot has changed since we signed deals 3 years ago to test bringing additional news links to Facebook News in the US. Most people do not come to Facebook for news, and as a business, it doesn't seem to make sense to overinvest in areas that don't align with user preferences. I quite frankly," end quote, "think that is concerning, and I actually disagree with this, although I have not seen studies on this, but I'll tell you why in a minute." Now, this $105 million spent on additional news content for that news tab was for incremental links. News companies could still publish content to Facebook, at will, meaning, the APs of the day, they can still publish their content on Facebook. They're just not going to get prioritized like they were before because they're not getting paid. Now, although hundreds of news publishers are still eligible to have their content included in the news tab, the funding to roughly 50 publishers, these are some of the major top tier news sources, are basically not going to be renewed. For example, Facebook spent more than $10 million on its news partnership with the Wall Street Journal. They spent more than $3 million with CNN, more than $20 million with the New York Times, and on and on and on. That's according to sources talking to Axios. In some cases, these partnerships also allowed them to unlock paywalled content, meaning you want to go see that New York Times or Wall Street Journal article, the paywall wouldn't be there if you weren't a subscriber. So there you go. Now, Facebook is already rampant with disinformation, as I previously reported. So they also cut funding, for the record, and staff for their election watchers, which is basically an open invitation for the world's intelligence communities to start slamming us with even more disinformation. And that, I think, is a huge problem. I've talked about that in the past in previous videos and podcasts here. The only counterweight that I can think of to that onslaught, outside of them basically trying to bail out the ocean with a bucket by finding and cutting these things down, the only actual counterweight on Facebook is actual legitimate news sources. And by cutting the funding, when they pull out, all we're going to be left is things like your cousin posting everything they eat all day, or about 1 billion cat videos, or TikTok videos that have been reposted there, since TikTok is basically killing Facebook right now, not to mention every crazy uncle everywhere becoming a primary news source for their entire friend list. JFK Jr. is coming back in Dallas. You heard it here first. That's news. That is my biggest problem here. Social media is ruining society, and I think that Zuckerberg here actually has a duty to actually give a damn about this and try to do something. But since nothing is going to happen, I will say it once again, as I've said it for many years at this point, it's time to put Mark Zuckerberg in jail. We've got to put him on trial for these kinds of things. This is a huge, huge problem. Forgetting the demonstrable evidence and it's caused rampant depression and suicidal thoughts in teen boys and definitely in teen girls, we have a huge problem with disinformation on here that is essentially being left unchecked. They've tried to apply artificial intelligence to it. That's not really doing that well of a job beyond saying, hey, like you might click here to read more information. Well, nobody is. Studies have shown that's a huge problem. And so here we have legitimate news sources. So when your crazy uncle does think JFK is coming back and posts on that, now you've got an AP news story that's being posted on the news feed that his friends can also see that says, no, and here's why. And so we are losing that counterweight. So what's the point to Facebook anymore? I understand there's a social media. I understand you want to get together with your friends. You want to basically give Facebook more information on you so they can more effectively advertise to you. That's the trade-off. It's free to use, so you're the product. But nevertheless, most people, I should say anecdotally, that I know go to Facebook for news. They talk about news, they share news, they post news. And sure, I get the occasional, like, this is what I had for lunch, click, but for the most part, a lot of my friends are talking about the politics of the day or something along those lines. And so I think this is actually a rather important thing, because if they are cutting this funding and or this incentivization for news sources to actually talk on their platform, they're screwing us all. This is a huge problem, and I think that as this happens, people are not going to be leaving Facebook because they're, quite frankly, addicted to it, and if they're seeing less news and more crazy conspiracy theories and intelligence operation disinformation campaigns, as we've seen all over the world on Facebook, from the United States to Myanmar and back around again, we are asking for trouble. If anything is going to drive a wedge even deeper into society, it is losing a counterweight, it is losing a check and balance to disinformation that we see is completely running amok. So Mark Zuckerberg, you can go straight to hell for that one. We need our news sources on Facebook. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter, where apparently you're not going to get news unless you're following me and watching these, as well as following me and subscribing to me on YouTube. Please, I need the followers. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everyone.